have a story about that in a second. So,
all right. Do you see the little like thing?
yes. Okay. Hi.
Hi. Hi, all of you watching at home. This is the very first time I've ever recorded anything on Zoom for the internet, so apologize in advance for anything that's a little wonky. But I'm Rose Lerner. I'm a historical romance author, as well as a freelance editor and book doctor. And I have a new book out, an Audible original called Wife in the Attic, that is a queer FF Jane Eyre retelling. And also, yeah, you can find me on, we're just going to do the intro at the beginning with all of our information, and then we'll get into the meat of it. So you can find me online at roselerner.com, Lerner, Twitter at Rose Lerner. I do have a Patreon if you want to support me between books or learn weird historical facts, or both. And that is also Rose Lerner. And we'll also have that information as well as links to like books and stuff in the notes below.
Hi. She says, coughing. I'm Dr. Angela Toscano. I am currently the book review editor for the Journal of Popular Romance Studies. And I'm also doing a Patreon where I teach a monthly class on a trope or convention of romance. So right now on the Patreon, we're talking about rakes. And next month, we're going to be talking about the marriage of convenience. And then last month, we did Gothic romances. So I'm also doing tarot card readings. So you can find both my Patreon at patreon.com/LazarusPace, which is also my Twitter handle. And my tarot readings are available at angelartoscano.com, where you can book an appointment with me to get your cards read. I'm not a psychic. I just read the cards.
And I've had a reading with her that was really helpful for me, so I totally recommend. We'll probably get into that in a bit, but
yeah, we will, since that's part of what we're talking about today. Tarot and storytelling. So, yeah. How do we want to start? Where do we want to go from here?
Well, I'm really excited by what you said in the, like, I didn't understand it, but I'm very excited to understand it. You were talking about like how to talk about what cards how can represent characters, I think, and then also how you can make a sentence with the cards.
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about tarot and like the history and some stuff about that first. So once upon a time in the 19th century, when everyone was a little bit insane, they were really obsessed with Egypt. And all of the occultists decided that everything had its origins in ancient Egypt, including the tarot cards. Now, if you've ever looked at a deck of tarot cards, the first thing you will notice is that this is an insane idea, because these are figures that are straight out of medieval European history. Like, they do not look like they have their origins in ancient Egypt. Okay, like here's the classic Rider-Waite-Smith. This is the devil card, right? Not really ancient Egyptian-y. I mean, granted, this deck was made at the beginning of the 20th century. It was commissioned by Edward Waite, who is a big occultist for the Golden Dawn, from a woman named Pamela Coleman Smith. And she did all the art for this. And this is the deck that's the most famous. This is the one that shows up like on all of like the TV shows, right? So tarot actually has its origins in Renaissance Europe, specifically in like Italy, right? So you get a lot of character types that are like very similar to characters that would have been found in like medieval historical romances, which, you know, have like very little commonality with like modern romance. So there's like built into the deck a kind of storytelling, right? But that's true with like a lot of games, right? If you think about RPGs or even something like Monopoly, there's like a structure there in the game where you could use like the little pieces and like the board to tell a story. So I think that games are really interesting because they seem to be connected to storytelling, but they're doing something different. Yeah, so that's sort of my basic philosophy of like the history of tarot. So there's two schools of like reading tarot. One is the English way, which is that their cards each have like an inherent meaning, and then you memorize the card meaning, and then that's how you determine like the outcome, right? And then you have like the continental way of reading, which is a little bit more based on like a specific question. So if you're like familiar, if you're like a real big nerd and you're like familiar with like a postmodern linguistic like philosophical theory, it kind of like tracks onto that, right? Where you either think like a word has like an inherent meaning and always has that word, or you think that like language is mutable, right? So I'm more of the
This
mutable.
is really interesting to me because like when you did the reading for me, there were like several different cards where you were telling me like what the like meaning of that card was like in the book, but like I was getting like a strong feeling from the card, like in that specific card and the art on that card in that deck, that was like really different from that, or at least not like exact, like that was different. Yeah.
Yeah, the way that you want to think about it is like when you, if you're like learning a language, right? You might go to the dictionary and look up the meaning of the word, but the meaning is only going to tell you the denotations, right? And it's not like the denotations of the meaning aren't like real. They are, but there's also like, you're not going to get the connotations of like that meaning in the dictionary, right? So, and I think slang is like a really good way of thinking about this, because that is often like not, it's like so new that no like legitimate dictionary has like captured like the slang meaning of, I don't know, it's an example of like remember when everyone was using on fleek like 8 years ago? Like that's like what I mean by like connotation. Like there's connotations of like that term that maybe wouldn't show up in like a dictionary definition, that you only would really understand in like the actual play of like using it on Twitter, for example. Yeah. So, yeah, what else can I say about tarot now?
Well, you were going to talk about the idea of like using it to talk about specific characters or specific people, I guess. And I can't imagine what that means. So I'm
okay. Sorry. Thank you for reminding me. I forgot in my earlier.
Hey, that's what I like. Look, like it's gonna go, like it's gonna be a bit of a shoots and ladders situation, but like we're having fun together.
Yeah. Okay. So the deck is divided into the major arcana, or the trump cards, and the minor arcana, or the pips. Now the pip cards like are they are related to the regular like deck of cards, right? So for example, pentacles are diamonds, clubs are like wands, right? So the pip cards are usually about,
I'm not making up that like some European countries traditional playing card decks look more like the tarot cards, right? Like when I was researching All or Nothing, it looked like maybe in Germany, if you buy just like a deck of cards like at the store, or like in Italy, it'll look a lot closer to a tarot deck.
Yeah, because they have, I'm gonna have to turn my camera off because I have to stand up in a weird way. But let's see if that, okay. So these are the Marseille deck. This is like the French tarot deck. And you can see right away that like it looks more like the playing cards than like the Rider-Waite, right? So yeah, like they don't have a lot of, and then like you can also see this has like much more, this is much older, how medieval, Renaissance, and European like these cards look, right? So the pips are all about actions most of the time, right? On the Rider-Waite, they usually have people like doing stuff. I mean, this guy's not doing stuff, but he's had something done to him, right? Or this guy, right? So all of the pip cards they're about action, emotion, like verbs. I would guess would be how you would want to think of. They're verbs and adjectives is how I would think of the pip cards. Whereas then you have the trump cards. The trump cards would be, how would I describe it? They're like the motifs and themes, right? So they're like they're the big underlying symbolic system that like maybe you're not aware of as you're reading the story initially, but then when the person in your English class asks you about it, you are forced to make some sort of statement about how, you know, this is actually all symbolic of the rise of capitalism or something like that. And then finally you have the court cards. So here's the Queen of Wands, one of my favorite cards. You can see that she's got like a little cat in the front, a little black cat. Court cards are often people. So characters in the story, right?
Wait, can you tell me what the other, so these are court cards. What was the second group?
The trump cards or the major
trump cards.
Yeah.
And the distinction is that the court cards are the king, queen, and page,
yeah.
or okay.
So it's the page, knight, queen, and king. Or if you're Aleister Crowley, it's like princess, prince, queen, and king, right? Yeah, Aleister Crowley had like a slightly different system, and he was having like, because he was like in a beef with Edward Waite.
Every like everything can be tracked back to beef. Like I was trying to explain, like I was recording a podcast. I was recording my Wicked Wallflowers podcast recently, and we were talking about a new translation of the Odyssey, and I was trying to explain about the beef that Byron and Keats had about translations of Homer, and how like and I was thinking about how like you were just talking about English class, like the number, like I must have read on first looking into Chapman's Homer in like 3 English classes, and we never talked about the context in which it was written or what it was about, which was the fact that he was taking a political stance on his preferred translation of Homer. And it's like, how do you, like, what does that poem even mean if you don't know that? Like, anyway.
It just seems, you're like, is this just like a sweet meditation on your favorite thing? No, it's like a 15 tweet rant about how your preference for the other translation of Homer is bad. Oh yeah, anyway.
And classist as well. I mean, the point was that Pope was like the aristocratic translation. Anyway, like we don't need to get into the whole thing, but like it was the Tories anyway, like the Pope translation.
Yeah, it's true. Anyway, occult history is full of people who have like a beef with each other. And it's, I mean, they can, and the tradition continues this to this day. So people are fighting. Yeah. Okay. So the trump cards, there's 21 cards. The Fool is the first one, and they're all numbered. And they kind of, they're really interesting. So you have the Fool. I'm trying to find them. I did not, because I shuffled the cards because I used them. They're not in order. The Magician is like the next one. You've got, and you can see just by their names, like the Chariot.
And does the number just mean like if you were actually playing like a playing card game, what their value would be, or what does the number mean in the?
Well, I've never tried to play a game with tarot cards, and I'm not sure anybody, like, whatever.
I mean, is that a holdover from their status as playing cards, or does it have meaning what the order is?
So most of the time, though, when people talk about the numbers of the tarot, especially the trump cards, they have an esoteric meaning, right? So the Fool is like 0, but the World, which is 21, is like also 0. So it's sort of like cyclical. And like Death is like the unnumbered 13th card, like for example. So
does unnumbered mean the number's not written on it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like in the Marseille system, Death does not have a number written on the card. I'll try to find like the Death card in the Marseille deck, but oh, there it is. Oh no, I was wrong. It doesn't have a name. It does have a number. That was right. There's the Death card. It's just like reaping and sowing. Yeah. So the trump cards, like I said, sometimes they can be people, but as one of my favorite occultists said, it's like you're probably not important enough to have like the people in the Trumps show up in like your actual life. It's more like themes, and I think that that's true. Like if you're like, I don't know, Joe Biden, then you might show up as, I don't know, the emperor, because you literally are, right? Like, but if you're just like the boss of like a small, I don't know, independent movie theater, like you're more likely to show up as maybe like the King of Pentacles in like the deck, than you are as like the emperor. You know, not always, but I would say that court cards show up as regular people more than trump cards. I have noticed though that when I've been reading cards like for people, the trump cards usually show up when big changes are afoot, interestingly enough. Like I always note, like if I get like for example you know, I do a 3-card spread and I get like all trump cards, I'm just like, oh, something's up. Like we didn't get any pips, you know. And just if you think about it, like statistically, there's more pip cards than there are trump cards, so you would be more likely to get like 2 pips in a trump or like 2 pips in a court card.
I will never forget when you were doing my reading and I was asking you about if I should try to like go back to school and try for like a, you know, traditional like career like in this economy, and it was like the reversed Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
I was like, no, dude.
We're gonna try this, you know, freelance thing for a while, I guess.
You're caught in history, yeah. So I think you can read, I mean, one of the games that I like to play with myself, is you like trying to figure out what a statement or a sentence would look like if it showed up in the cards. I think it helped you learn how to read the cards because it's almost like a reverse translation, right? So, for example, now I have to actually go through the deck and find the cards that I want to use for this, which I should have done beforehand, but got totally distracted. So there's that. So we're going to do the first line from Pride and Prejudice, which is, of course, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a rich man is
a single man in possession of a large fortune must be in want of a wife. That line actually appears in Wife in the Attic because Miss Oliver and Lady Palethorpe read Pride and Prejudice together. I think Lady Palethorpe's Pride and Prejudice opinions may be controversial to some. She doesn't like Mr. Darcy, but Miss Oliver does. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
it points out that single women in possession of a large fortune aren't exactly everyone's like, oh, well, she must be fine. We don't need to try to get her married off.
Right. She must be fine. What is another one that might work here? Okay. I have like 2 options. So I think that line would look like the World, the King of Pentacles, and then the Lovers, right? So you have like the World where it is a truth universally acknowledged, right? Like that's like this part of the sentence that, you know, a single man in possession of a fortune, like this is so clearly like that guy, right? I mean, you might want to choose like people will be like, well, what about the Knight of Pentacles, because knights are more like technically like single, right? But if you see like the Knight of Pentacles, who I will try to find here, he's kind of like a plotting, like Don Quixote kind of figure. Like he doesn't really look like a guy who's either rich or looking for a wife, you know. Like he's really, look at this guy, he's just sort of standing still on his horse, looking at this coin, like he's lost. It looks like he's a van idling at the corner who's like trying to figure out which direction to turn, right? Like that is this card. So I wouldn't choose that card for like that second part of the sentence because that's not this guy. No, he seems a little bit more, yeah. I think of this guy as Don Quixote. He's very sort of plodding still and not necessarily super.
I'm trying to decide if there's like a different Jane Austen hero that I feel like is that guy. So far, I don't have anything.
Yeah, I'm going to try to pull up more of the court cards here. Yeah, so you get like the single man in possession of a fortune. I mean, it could be, and again, like these could have like multiple different like meanings, right? Because they're like all embedded in the card. And that's why I really like questions as framing devices for like thinking about what the meaning of the cards is. Because depending upon like what your question is, that's going to like determine how I would read the card, right? So if you're asking a question about your love life and the King of Pentacles shows up, that's going to have like a really different resonance than if you're like asking about your job, right? Or like what like your real estate, like if you're like, oh, I need to sell my house and the King of Pentacles shows up, I'm like, I could be like, oh, you know, you need to get like a realtor who has like a big, you know, who's, you know, has a good reputation. Might be like what that, you're like, you need to get the right realtor. Like that would be how he would show up in like that situation, right?
Or like maybe a developer is looking to tear down
or
your
maybe,
house.
yeah, a developer is like looking for your, you know, they'll call you. They're looking for a new investment, that kind of thing. Yeah. And then I could put like the Queen of Pentacles as like in want of a wife because obviously these two like go together. But I think that, and I lost the card. I think that the Two of Cups is more representative of like marriage. And a lot of times people think of that as like the marriage card too, as like the Two of Cups. So each of the pips, the cups, the wands, the swords, has like a traditional vibe associated with it. So cups are all about like emotion of some kind. Not just in like a romantic kind of, and I don't mean that in like the sense of like love, right? I mean in like sort of like the sublime romantic poet kind of like feeling or emotion. I mean like internal states of being is more like what cups is about. So intuition, emotion, psychology, that sort of stuff. Wands are like action cards. Are we swearing? Because my way of like reading the wands.
I mean, I'm fine with swearing. Like,
okay, guys, brace your. It's the fighting and fucking cards. Like the wands are either about fighting or fucking or both, right? Like that's how. And if you see the wands, like where's a good wand card for this? When you see the wands, you'll realize what I mean by that. Okay.
you also said that they could sometimes be like labor or like
Yeah.
hard work. Like
Yeah.
Like there was one that I really love, like that I was asking you about my book release, and the Four of Wands came up, and it made me really happy because it looked like a chuppah, like the Jewish.
Yes, that one's also
hat.
a marriage card. So there's that guy. It really is about like action in the world, right? Is how I think about the wands. But the swords are about. The swords are also about fighting, but like I would say that the wand fighting is more about like the dynamic energy it takes to get something done versus where the swords are always sort of painful cards. Because they're about like piercing or loss in some way, right? And there's something they get associated with like intellectual stuff too for some reason. I'm not really know why.
Sharpness, right?
Probably,
I mean, I a lot like when you
yeah,
mentioned before, you said it was like sharpness or like discernment or like judgment, right? It's like
yeah,
yeah.
you cut through, right? So there's something like the act of like cutting, right? So, and then finally, like the pentacles, which are really about the pentacles are interesting because they get associated with like earthy stuff and also work, but I think that they're more mercurial than that because they are about like you know resources and um matters of exchange, right? So it's not just like work, it's more like exchange, right? And you can see like this is a good example of that because you have this guy who's like juggling these two coins, and in the background you have these
Oh, it's a
ships
ship.
on the rough seas, right? So there's kind of like a sense that like whatever he's balancing is kind of also at the whims of maybe the weather, other people's investments, right? Because you could think about like he's invested in these ships and like he's waiting for his ship to come in, but like whether it'll turn out well is like up in the air, right? So that
Don't borrow more money than you can afford on the strength of your ships at sea. I think we've all learned that lesson from the Merchant of Venice.
yes, and Beauty and the Beast, I think, as well.
Yes,
The same theme.
yes, totally.
Um, so yeah,
Even if
so
your boyfriend wants to get married, tell him to wait.
yeah, and
Tell him
yeah,
he can get married later.
yeah. So this was the like I think this is the card, the Two of Cups, and I think that that says more like in want of a wife
I feel like
than
there's also a sense that that little lion wing thing is maybe matchmaking, right?
yeah,
Like it's like,
yeah. It's like either marrying them or it's brought them together in some way. It's very like an interesting symbol like system. If you're just starting out with the tarot, I think that the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is the best one to start out with because Pamela Coleman, especially like on the pip cards, like these are so beautifully like rendered. Like there's so much in them that you don't really need like the book to tell you what is happening. You can just read the card, right? Whereas in like the
when you,
Marseille deck, these are really like these are not these do not lend themselves to like easy reading, right? You kind of have to know already what sort of a two of coins is. Um, so this
I
is like,
really love that pagan otherworlds deck that you used when
yeah, this one's
it
great.
had sort of a like 18th century vibe in a way that I really like.
Yeah, this one, yeah. Here's the devil card in that deck. Um,
It's
I
not,
mean,
I mean, it's a little dark on the camera, but that's okay.
here, let
People
me
can
see.
probably,
There it is.
yeah.
You can see like he's like wearing a suit of hair and heads. It's so creepy. I think this devil is like so much more creepy than the devil from the Rider-Waite-Smith card. You're like, oh yeah, you don't want to meet that guy unless you have to. Here's justice. Okay.
Yeah, I have this book. I'm gonna it's not really related, but it's like it's called Enigmatic Fragments, and I got it at a museum in
That's really
France.
cool.
And it's like these weird, like it's just a collection. This guy just did a bunch of these weird allegories, and they're
Oh,
like so cool. And it's like some of them are so weird. Let me see if I can find like a real good, just like odd one. They all just have so much going on. Like this one, I can't. I think this is one is. I can't. Unfortunately, it's really hard to see what they are. This is. That's not that exciting. Sorry.
that's okay.
What is this one? Error. What's going on here? So many things.
So many things. Yeah, they have like a real similarity.
I like this one. This one I believe is hypocrisy. Yeah, hypocrisy. She's pretending to be a nun, but she's actually like a sexy snake lady. Oh, that's a good surprise.
That's a good surprise. It's like a classic of like 18th century pornography, right? The nun who isn't the nun who becomes a sexy snake lady. Yeah, there's like so many different kinds of decks, and like the decks have just like exploded now in terms of like people who are designing them. Some of them are more readable than others. Like some of them are very pretty, but I think it would be hard to work with them because they don't really lend them. Like there was a deck that I saw that it was just like the tarot as like 1990s like indie rock figures, and I was like, I mean, cool, but like I don't know if that would be like, oh, you got Kurt Cobain and Fiona Apple. I'm not sure like what. I just think that would be like hard to read with. But you know, different strokes for different folks. Like it depends. I had like 12. Wait, I have like 20 tarot decks at this point. So often I like just get new ones because of the art. And then
Sorry about the
sometimes
noise, everyone. That was my that usually reminds me to eat lunch. I'm having lunch late today. So why do I need an alarm to tell me to eat lunch? I just do.
I should get an alarm to remind me to eat lunch. I'm not very good at that.
I also have a friend who texts me to remind me to eat lunch. And still, I do not eat lunch on time so often.
Oh, well. So often. Yeah. What would you like to do next? What do you want to talk about?
Oh my gosh, what do I want to do next? Can we talk about characters in my book and what cards they would be? That sounds so
yeah, let's do that. So I pulled out all of the court cards. Hopefully that will make it like a little bit easier. So, like I said, people are mostly going to be like court cards, right? Although sometimes I'm going to pull out a couple of sword cards because I feel like there's a lot of swords in your story. Actually, so who do you want to start?
Not with? Maybe literally, but yeah.
Yeah, like as in terms of like the vibe that would show up if you were using the tarot to like play out the story. I think you get swords and cups. Swords and cups are like the two that show up. So which character do you want to start with?
I guess we should start with Miss Oliver. Why not? She's okay. It's like hard. It's an audiobook, and I keep wanting to say she's the narrator, but I feel like that becomes confusing because there's also a human being actress who is the narrator of the audiobook. But she's the main character, and it's told from her point of view, and she is, I don't know if uptight is the word, but she's like hypervigilant. She's like very guarded.
Yeah, she's guarded, and she's like that, she's like a closed off. Yes. Might be like the right way of describing her. So I think that she's not a queen, because a queen is in charge, right? I think that she is, maybe she's not like one of the things again that's about she actually might be this card.
Oh, I can see that.
So this is the Two of Swords, right? And so I said like court cards are often people, and they are, but sometimes when a person is embodying like a particular quality of character, then they show up as like a pip. So I could see this as being like hypervigilance, right?
Yeah.
But also she's blindfolded. So the hypervigilance is also preventing her from seeing something, right?
Yeah, like she's not able, like her perceptions or her instincts are like, she's not able to access them, but also she's like, I mean, she is obviously also in a situation where things are being hidden from her purposely. And then
Right.
she's having like the cross swords are both like a defense, but also maybe choosing between two things, right? Like she's torn
Right.
between the
Yes.
two other characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Twos
like that.
almost always are either about balance or choice, right? Um, in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, I think
I
that
like
this
that.
is her. Because like if you look at like the pages, which would be usually I would say a page is somebody who is either a young person or somebody who doesn't have a great deal of power. Which could be somebody of any age, right? So the page of swords, no, like that guy's ready to go. Um, the page of pentacles, weirdly dreamy, right? Just sort of like, oh, money. Um, this guy feeling groovy, like he's just like, yeah, jaunty, right? And the page of wands, right? So all of the pages have sort of like an innocent openness about them that I just don't like see. As for like the knights, like you've got old plotty McPlotters, the Knight of Pentacles. Um, this guy, who's like a hotspur if there ever was one, right?
Yeah, that guy
The
is like
knight,
somebody who's like impulsive. I feel like, right?
yeah,
Like,
this
or
is like
not
impulsive.
impulsiveness, but it's like he trusts his judgment and he acts. Yeah.
He like acts. He acts and he cuts. Like he's
A
on the
Myers-Briggs P. Yeah.
yeah. Like then you have like a Knight of Wands, and again, like very. And then this guy. This is a Galahad. If there ever was like a Galahad, like he's
Aw.
got he's got wings on his helmet, right? So I don't see Miss Oliver in any of those like cards. Now look, depending on the deck and how these like people are rendered, they could be because different art obviously embodies like different qualities. So like that's why one of the other reasons that like the cards change. Like if you use a different deck, you're going to get different sort of meanings out of the cards because um, they've rendered the pictures differently. I'll try to find an example from like like one of my other decks. But yeah, so I would say she's this card. Like
I
I'm
like
gonna
it.
just this is
The fact
Miss
that it's in
Oliver.
front of the ocean is also just seems like very perfect. Like
Yeah, it's
I
like
think there might also
yeah,
be a bit in the I maybe it didn't make it into the final draft. There I of how why you can see the moon in the daytime, I believe is also perhaps product in that.
I don't
Because she's
remember. I don't
the
remember that from
stubbornness.
reading it, but
Yeah, it might have
uh,
not ended up in the final draft, but there's some stuff where she teaches the kid about optics and stuff. So
I remember that part. I don't remember the part about the moon
I
though.
think maybe it didn't. I think maybe I went with a different question. Like I went with the rainbow thing, I think, in the end of her
That
asking
sounds
about
more
yeah.
familiar. Yeah. Um,
One
cool.
time my we were in a cab when I was really small and my sister asked my mom why you could see the moon in the daytime sometimes and she was like, I don't know, we'll look it up later. And then the taxi driver explained it to us.
I love that. You're like,
Yeah.
well, you're like the hidden, yeah, that when the taxi driver comes out with like some
I mean, I think
weird,
a lot of taxi drivers in New York are very well educated because they're people
yeah,
who,
it's my
immigrated from
favorite
other
thing.
countries and haven't gotten like their work, they're to do the work that they actually are trained for. And so,
Yep.
yeah.
That is my one favorite thing about taxi drivers in big cities is that they always know stuff that like you would never guess. And you're like, oh, yeah. Um, okay. Which character is next?
Tabby. Because while you were showing me all the young cards, I was like, none of those feel like Tabby either. Because she is also a very weird. So she's the little girl. She's like, I mean, analogous to Adele in terms of the story, but not personality wise. Although in some ways, right? Like she's like a little bit of a show off in like the way that Adele is in Jane Eyre, but she's much
Yeah,
more
but
of like
not.
also like a mistrustful child. Who's
Yeah,
like her show, I think, like, I mean, and I don't want to make any assumptions about Adele because I don't necessarily trust what Jane is telling me about Adele, because a lot of it is just like she's French. But like
right.
like I think part of Tabby's show offness is coming from a place of like she's watching for your reaction because she's wants to be
Right.
prepared for if
Yeah,
things go
she's like,
south.
there's something like watchful about her. Um, hmm. I gotta think about that one. I'm looking through the cards now and I'm like, which one would she
If
be?
you come across one that immediately you're like, this is XYZ character, I mean, we don't have to go in any particular order, but
I'm just pulling out the ones that I'm kind of are like sort of speaking to me in terms of the
if you
characters.
see, I feel like I definitely want to do Lady Tassel also. So
Um,
not necessarily the main cast, but I just
Lady Tassel is like really interesting to me because that's her, but also, um,
I love the voice the narrator did for her.
I haven't had a chance to like listen to it yet. I mean, I read the book, you guys. I have, but I haven't. I haven't listened to the audio version.
Angela, since Angela is a Gothic expert, I really wanted her feedback on like the Gothic elements and like whether how she felt like it working sort of within the genre conventions, because a lot of the people that I usually get feedback from are very much like, you know, Regency romance, and so because this was something different and something that wasn't in my comfort zone, I really wanted to get feedback from that angle. So Angela was kind enough to read it. But the narrator does this incredible voice for Lady Tassel. I just like, I love it. So like, it's so perfect. I love it so much. She asked me really thoughtful questions about Lady Tassel, many of which I could not answer when she was preparing. She was like, so what does she do for fun? I was like, I don't know. Like, she wouldn't tell me that because I don't know her like that. You know, like Lady Tassel is also like a very, like, I feel like that's actually something that a lot of the characters have in common, except for maybe Lady Palethorpe, is that they think about how other people are perceiving them.
Yeah,
But and to varying degrees want to control that. And
I've
Lady
confused
Tassel,
Lady Pelthorpe and Lady Van Tassel in my life.
Lady
Remind
Palethorpe
me.
is the other character. Lady Tassel is Nick's mom from Sweet
Yes,
Disorder, who's
that's
like
right.
the
Yeah,
congresswoman based. She's like the political patroness. Like you,
this is Lady Tassel. She is the Queen of Swords, right? She's like, because of like her politics, and also, I mean, look at her hand gestures here, right? I just think, because it's like she's definitely a queen. She's not any other kind of card. She's not the Queen of Wands though. It's a little bit too witchy,
oh,
right?
sunflowers. Sunflower. Sorry, I just read this whole thing about how sunflowers were like super trendy among like arts and crafts, like art, yeah, like this
Yeah,
whole.
William Morris, yeah. Um, and she's not the Queen of Pentacles, at least not in this deck, because her head just like, you can see so much in like the body language of the characters, like about them, right? And then the Queen of Cups, who I think is, yeah, this is a woman who does politics, right? Who politics, right? Political
And who
machination.
has like I feel like there's like a very much a sense, like the other ones seem a little more like she is having an audience with somebody, right? Like
Yes. Yeah, there's
like
something about her gestures. She's looking out. She also evokes like the justice card. Like these are like very similar. So there's
got a
something,
nice hat.
yeah, and also because she's holding the sword, right? So it's there's something about like judgment or magistrating, that's not a word, magisterial action of some kind, right? Um, acts of the judges, like this. Yeah, I think that this is her. She's this card, the Queen of Swords. Very much. Yeah, Tabby to me is, where did my Tabby cards go? Um, oh no, I lost my Tabby cards. They were right here. I think that Tabby was gosh darn it, she's like the Four of Swords, or what did I do with them? That is crazy.
Well, take your time. I'll tell the rest of the Lady Tassel narrator story.
Yeah.
So, when I told my narrator, like, so she did this preparation ahead of time, and then when I told her how much I loved the voice, she's like, I thought about what someone's voice would be like where all of their clothes fit them perfectly. And I was like, on the one hand, that is like absolutely perfect, right? Like that immediately made sense to me. But then I was also like, I'm not an actress, because I would have no idea how to create a voice based on that.
Right.
But like, yes, but like how? But like, I like, it's so fascinating to me. Like, I love how different people do art so differently.
That's really, I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. You're right. I would never, like, what would your voice sound like if all, I don't know. Okay, so I think Tabby is either this card or this card.
I like the first one better with the
I think this is the one that resonated with me more. There's something really sort of like stubborn and recalcitrant, but like wary in like this Four of Cups, right?
Well, and also this sense of like, not like something is being offered, but should it be taken?
Yes, yeah. Like you're like, this is the card of
that. Definitely makes me think of like Star Trek episodes where there's like an ion cloud as the
you're just so many things show up out of clouds in these cards, right? Like it's just a descent from the heaven, right? So I think that it's interesting because I don't really feel like a lot of like the main characters are actually court cards or major arcana cards, which is really interesting to me. I think this card like jumped out at me as Palethorpe. Is
I can see that.
Yeah.
Sir Kit, yeah.
Yeah, Sir Kit. Yeah, like there's something, this is supposed to be a card of like generosity, but I also think that there's something so suspect in this card, right?
I feel like that card is like the double meaning of condescension. Do you know what I mean? It's like, there's like condescension in the positive, Mr. Collins talking about Lady Catherine de Bourgh sense, and then there's like,
but also it's like the way that like he's holding the scales, as if he can determine like the measure of like what other people's worth is, and the way that he's holding it above their heads, right?
And like, the way that they're reacting to him, right? Like they're not, I don't feel like they're reacting to him like they trust him, you know, like they're,
it's not, this is Sir Kit, like he's not really, I mean, I think he wants to be this guy. Like, I think he thinks he's this guy, right? But I think he's this guy.
I think if he looked at that picture, he might be like comfortable with that, because I think he might not see any of the things that you're pointing out.
Yeah.
He might be like, oh, what a nice guy. Right? Like, I don't know.
If you look at like the kings, right? So you have the King of Cups. And then you have like the King of Pentacles. And if you look at their faces too, I think it's really interesting. The King of Swords. And then the King of Wands. Like, I don't, the energy that they give off is not really any of the characters in the book, right? Even like weirdly though, I think Lady Palethorpe might be like, Lady Palethorpe is 2 cards. She's the Empress, actually. Right? Which is the only major arcana I've pulled for this, but like she has like Empress vibes. Like the way that you describe her body in like the bed, like, and her hair and her half naked, like it just, Empress vibes. But she's also this card. Oh. Right? Like now, the thing about the Eight of Swords that people don't notice is that she's surrounded by swords and she's blindfolded and bound, but her feet are not bound, which is like one of the most important things about this card, right? Because it demonstrates that there is an out, right? Like you're not completely, it's not like the
Is
10
she,
of swords.
show it to me again. I want to see where the swords are, because I think, yeah, she
It's
is
like
walking. There's one sword that's not in the line and she's walking towards it, maybe.
yeah, it's not, it's like she's fenced at the back, but she's not actually completely encircled, right? And so it has it's like there's confinement and it's real, right? But it's not like the 10 of swords, which I showed at the beginning, which is the guy on the ground with all the 10 swords in his back. I mean, there's really nowhere to go once that has happened, right?
Be mostly dead.
You're like mostly dead, right? This is, yeah. But I think it's like interesting. I mean, I really also just feel like this is so.
The minute you showed it to me, it was like, yeah, like that's a lady that just like, she has a nice dress, but she just kind of put it on, you know, like, and she's just like it has like a very, like what we were talking about earlier, where like the other characters are very aware of their presentation. And like that lady kind of looks like she dressed for herself. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, the Empress is like you can see she's associated with Venus because there's the glyph for the planet Venus right there. You would say that like she's the queen of queens, might be another way of like talking about the Empress. You could also say that like she's like the great goddess. Like associations with maybe like Aphrodite and Ishtar, right? Maybe Isis, although I associate Isis a little bit more with the high priestess. But there's something about like a power coming from like the self rather than any external stuff, right? Like it's a goddess card, really. Um, which is,
I love that.
yeah. But I mean, it's like I think that yeah. I mean, I love Lady Pelthorpe's character. Like I think that she's so interesting, and um it it's like so interesting like how powerful of like a personality she is, despite the fact that like she's been confined for so long. Like she's like managed to retain her own like personhood, like under like a very extreme like duress, right? Which is not, not everybody could. Not
Yeah,
everybody has like the strength of character.
but in some ways, like I think it's like she was kind of like she's more like, because she's not, like she's kind of lost her filter, you know, like it's like
Yeah,
she's like kind of lost that piece, like, you know, and in some extent, like I kind of think maybe she has ADD, but like it's like I feel like she was always like an impulsive person who maybe spoke before she thought, you know, or
right.
like was offending people accidentally or whatever. But like definitely over the last, you know, little, I don't want to spoil too, but like, you know, like it's like she has kind of not in the habit anymore of like being social. And so
Right.
she just kind of is just like on 11, you know what I mean? Like she's just like, first of all, because she doesn't really see any downside, because like what are the consequences going to be, that's, you know, and then it's like that's like, you know, worse or different than what's going on already. But also it's like that habit of thinking about other people's reactions has kind of like, she's kind of lost that. And so it's just like,
Right. Yeah, there's like you when you don't have to consider like the human ordinary consequences because you're just mostly alone. Like you could just be like, it's weird. Like you become like more yourself, and it gives you like a weird kind of power. Like I mean, I might have pulled like a hermit card, but the hermit card seems like so intentionally um like monastic, right? Where like that's like not like there's something that's just sort of like fecund and like chaotic about like the Empress too. Like everything's just sort of like spread out and like all over the place.
Yeah, she's not wearing a corset.
Right, no.
Or maybe a
Not,
bra, I don't know.
or anything, right? Where's like the I'm try to show like the Empress in the other deck. So that people can get like a the Empress in the Rider-Waite is so like embodied. I don't know what other word to use. Like she's like just she's such a body. Like she's such a powerful like physical, sensual, sexual like presence. Whereas like that's like not the case in like the Marseille deck where everybody kind of looks like this. Like they're like in block colors, right?
Yeah, I remember the Empress in the Pagan Otherworlds deck also looking like much more like a, you know, like a political figure or like a
here she is. Yeah, she's much more like she's just like not scattering her seeds. Like that's I don't know how else to describe like the one like she's just not as sexual. Like that's really what it is. She's not sensual or sexual in like the same way. Like she's got her legs crossed, for example. Like whereas like her legs are falling open, you know, like that's yeah, and it's like that sort of pictorial difference that I think really like changes like the meaning. Like when I do readings, I usually ask people which deck they want me to use, like which ones they're like vibing with, because like the some of the ways that these are depicted between decks are just like so different that
yeah, it's funny, like the art style of the, like I was saying, the Pagan Otherworlds one, but it looks kind of 18th century in this way. And I feel like there was like a point in my life like where I didn't like that style of art really felt very like the only word that's coming to mind is like barren, but like it really felt very like flat to me, and like I wasn't able to sort of like get like emotional like energy from it. And like I feel like through researching the 18th century more or like looking at it more or something, that it has become much more like accessible to me in some way that I like can't I don't know, like the like and this is something with like actors also. There's like certain actors that people will describe as like wooden, where I like really get like very strong emotional vibes from them, but they're just like stiff sort
like
of
who?
physically. Like Kristen Stewart, or like the guy that plays Oliver Queen on Arrow, what is his name, Stephen Amell.
Yeah,
Where it's like they're playing a character that is like very stiff, but like there's like I don't know, there's just like a lot of like energy, like it's like
yeah, you're right, because like Kristen Stewart as like Bella, she always has this sort of like strange like weird like neurotic energy, which I think is like accurate to the books, right?
Yeah, and it's definitely
like,
intentional. Like Kristen Stewart has talked in interviews about how like Bella was so stiff, as like her face would be sore after she did a scene because she was like holding her face
like
like
holding
really
her
like
face in.
yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, here's the Empress from this deck I got.
Ooh.
It's the Sabbat magazine is a magazine that does like articles and stuff like on witchcraft, and they put out this deck. I love it.
Love
And like you
that.
see, she's actually holding like a microphone. So it's like this really weird
What is on the shield? Is it like
it is it's
scarab?
like a scarab.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I love these because they have these like little hidden so here's like the Knight of Pentacles, but you see like she's wearing like fishnet stockings and like a garter. It's like very so these are the two different interpretations of like the same card, right? trying to get the light to capture it. Is it? Yeah. So you can see like, and that's like the other thing that I think is so interesting about the tarot is that it is like taking like the same sort of tropes and conventions of like the genre and then twisting them through like the depiction of like the different artistic styles, right? So, you know, like I was saying on like Twitter, it's like my favorite trope that is almost never done well is secret baby. Um I love a secret baby. Um but it's almost never done
So what is it
effectively.
about it that like what is the thing that you love that you don't see?
I really like I really feel like it's just like the emotional payoff of it like often doesn't work for me, but that's the thing that I love about it, right? It's like this sudden revelation of like a child. But part of it I think is that people don't really investigate the relationship between the parent who has learned about the child and the child as like a separate relationship where they also have to build it, right? Like it often ends up being like insta love on like the part of like the parent and the child, like they immediately have like a bond. And I would rather see something where like, you know, no, like they have to like grow into sort of like physical and like emotional affection with each other because they don't know each other, right? Like they didn't have like those early attachments of like holding the baby like against your chest and like it like drools on you and it's like sticky on you. I don't know, children are like always sticky even when you clean them. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um
There's a joke in Wife in the Attic about she's like, oh, Tabby smells, and then she's like, oh no, Tabby doesn't actually smell like good. And like, you know, like her hair is sticky. I don't know what's up with that.
like she's yeah, like oh, my niece always smelled like a little puppy, like a little sweaty wet puppy. Like she would like come, she'd be like, I'm like, where have you been? Like you're like oh god, like I mean, but it's just also this, it's like a weird, it's not a good smell, but it's like evocative of like
I miss babies. One
protective
day I'll
instincts.
hold a
I
baby
know.
again.
It's like my sister and I were talking about that because my niece is now like 14 and we're like somebody in this, some other person in this family needs to have like a baby we can cuddle like right now. um it's like fat baby. Yeah, but I think that, you know, because I feel like people just pretend like children aren't people with like their own interiorities and like their own like emotional responses to like other people. And I don't think that I, you know, it's one thing if the baby is like actually like a baby, but even still, like if you're like around like a 6-month old child, they don't go to everybody, you know, like some kids are like really um suspicious even when they're like 3 months, and they will cry if you hand them over to somebody who they do not know, and they will cry loudly. So yeah, that's like my thing with secret baby.
I have been watching The Mandalorian and like I have been really struggling with like how chill Baby Yoda is. I'm like,
Yeah,
I don't feel like Baby Yoda would be this calm. Like it's a baby, like it's also a force sensitive baby, so it can like feel violence, right? And it's like,
yeah,
why is this baby never throwing a tantrum or screaming? Ever.
yeah,
Like that
yeah.
seems weird. And it's like, I guess, I mean, I know it's an alien baby, but I just, then what is it? Alien, like, I don't know. And then it's like, okay, is Baby Yoda so traumatized that like, like he has learned to not respond to like trauma, you know, like that's upsetting as well. Like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I read this. This is totally tangential, but I guess it actually has to do with your book because I think that that was why, like, this is like the tabby card, right? Is because people act like children don't have like trauma from these situations, and they totally do. And that they are a separate entity who needs to have like a other kind of, like, they're their own character. I mean, that's why people hate plot moppets, because they're not their own character. They're not really a person. They're just there to like further it, which is why I hate the secret. Why I love the secret baby trope, but I wish it was done better, is usually because I think that the child is not depicted accurately there.
Yeah, I mean, I was really nervous about writing a kid, and I'm sure that it won't work for everyone how I did it, but I really wanted to avoid like a kid who like wasn't like who was an idea of a child instead of a child, you know, like and I it's not easy. I mean, especially because then it's like you have to balance like how much they're there, you know, it's like you don't want the whole book to be the kid, but like kids need a lot of attention. So it's like it's just yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, sometimes it's easier when you have like a specific kind of child as like a model, even if that like child is yourself. Because if I remember what I was like at like 6 years old, I was like very precocious, surprise, and like really emotionally intense, and like felt overwhelmed by the world like a lot, right? And so I too I needed a lot of attention because I would get overwhelmed by just like ordinary stuff, right? And it would freak me out and I would be upset, right? Um or like other kids are just, I think about like some like my nieces and nephews and cousins and stuff like that who have like smaller kids, and they're just like, you know, my friend's daughter is just like a wild thing, like fearless and hilarious and just like a criminal mastermind. And she's like 3.
Yeah, I thought a lot about myself. I mean, I honestly like I have a lot in common with Tabby. I mean, I think luckily I was in a better home situation, so I wasn't as freaked out all the time. But like certainly my home, there was like tension in my home. Although there wasn't obviously like it was obviously nothing like in most ways nothing like what's in the book. However, I did draw on like my own experience of like kind of dealing with like my parents fighting or in the more normal ways with my parents. But like I did like I was a kid who I really wanted to be taken seriously. I didn't appreciate it when adults laughed at me. And it's like I like you can't like how do you not laugh at children? They're so funny, but it's like I hated that very much. And I also I was also the kid that always wanted to listen to the adults talking adult talk after dinner.
Yeah.
And it was like not even like I didn't want to be part of the conversation. Like I just wanted to observe. And it's like I feel like I almost felt like I was like on the other side of the one-way glass or something. Like I was just like glimpsing into how the other half lives, and it was just like adults talking about normal, boring adult stuff, but I was like mesmerized.
Yeah. I think, yeah, it is definitely identify with that. Yeah. Like wanting to be taken seriously, for sure. And I was like really lucky because my parents did. And I try to do that with kids too, like when I'm interacting with them. I just think it's important. Yeah. It's like one of those weird things about Gothic novels, though, because there's almost always like a child involved in like so many of like the Gothic novels of like the 60s and 70s, really which is really their heyday. But so rarely are they like real figures.
Yeah, and I definitely I'm not gonna say I've never enjoyed a book that was like this, but I tend to really dislike the sort of bad seed thing where like the child is somehow just like a force of evil, you know what I mean? Or like it was born like sick and so like mentally like just that like the child is a sociopath. I really don't enjoy those. I'm not gonna say there's no child that ever was born that was just like a dick from birth and like destined to be a jerk. Do you know what I mean? But like
Right.
I don't tend to enjoy that as a storytelling thing because I just feel like first of all, it removes a lot of responsibility from the adults around the child. And second of all, I just don't find it very interesting. It doesn't like it usually just feels like, especially like in Rebecca, right? Like I was rereading Rebecca recently, and it was talking about like Mrs. Danvers is talking about Rebecca as a child, and like how, and like basically describing her as like having been just like herself from birth. But it's like so obviously a self-serving narrative, because what she's actually describing, I mean, if you look at it, is a child who clearly has dealt with some kind of sexual abuse,
right?
Like she is a child who's precociously sexual, which usually is a sign that something bad has happened to that child. Right. And since Mrs. Danvers is clearly in love with her and was her nursemaid, and also her father seems like a creep, right? I'm like, am I the reader supposed to believe this about this child and be like, oh yeah, Rebecca was rotten from birth? Or like, am I supposed to understand that something really bad happened to Rebecca? Like, I don't know what Daphne du Maurier intended. I have actually heard that Daphne du Maurier might have been an incest survivor of some kind herself, so it may very well be intentional, but like that kind of narrative usually doesn't interest me, and I kind of wanted to almost like, I don't tend to really like the word subvert, because I don't necessarily want to be like, ooh, like I did it so different from everybody else. Like I don't want to do like an I'm not like other girls with like tropes. You know what I mean? It's like I want to do the trope a little differently, where it was like Mrs. Oliver thinks that Tabby is like, Tabby gives off maybe some bad seed vibes, right? Like, that really is more of like the narrative that Miss Oliver is bringing to it than like what's actually happening, you know?
Yeah, and I think that like that's, I mean, my mother told me this story like 3 years ago, so this is about me. She's like, oh yeah, your third grade teacher hated you. I was like, oh yeah, she did. But like at the time I didn't realize that. I was just like, well, I don't understand like what I'm doing wrong, right? And she's like, my mom was like, oh yeah, she didn't like you, she didn't understand, she kept describing you as grim in like parent teacher conferences. I was like, and like and was like resentful of that. And she, and I think that that's so interesting, because it sort of demonstrates how people's expectations of like what a child should be, right? Like, so they don't realize that they are being cruel or reacting in a way that is not actually about the child, but about what they think a child should be, you know? My sister and I were talking about Dance Mom. You're like, it's sort of it's kind of like a version of stage mothering, like where it's like you need to be performing this particular role in the family because you're not really a person, and it's a way of like staging the child's emotions for the benefit of like the adults, right? And I hate that so much in real life, that when I see it played out in a book where it's like very unintentional, right, that I'm always just like, that this kid, no, this is not, it's
I was thinking about that actually a lot. I've been thinking about that a lot with Jane Eyre, in a way that I hadn't quite put together, but it's like Jane herself and Charlotte Bronte, I'd say, are so judgmental of like other children in the book. Like Adele obviously is portrayed as like the wrong kind of child, because she also is like clearly in Jane's view, I don't know if sexual is the right word, but flirtatious. She's like too flirtatious. And it's like, well, she was raised by a sex worker in her home where like Mr. Rochester was. I mean, you know, it's like, I just like, there are reasons that she's behaving this way that are not like she's French, right? That like her French genes have made her inappropriately frivolous or something, right? It's like, this is the cultural situation that she, and then like also like
how old was she when Mr. Rochester, like,
I'm not sure, but I would say between like when Mr. Rochester what?
Becomes her like exclusive guardian, like when her mother dies.
I would say, I can't remember, I would have to look, but I'm sure she must be somewhere between like 6 and 8, right?
Like she's somewhere between 6 and 8 in the book, like when Jane,
so, and I think she's recently come to England, right? At that point?
I'm so confused because like because I can't remember the book. I can only remember the 14 different like film versions.
I
read the book, but it just like sort of like bleeds together into like the film versions I've seen. And so I'm just like, I thought he got her when she was a baby, but I think that was just maybe the film version.
I think he knew her when she was a baby because he was her father. But
Right.
like, I don't think that he had guardianship of her as a baby. I think
Yeah.
possibly she was like with somebody else in between. I can't remember the exact story, but I mean, clearly she does remember her mother, and she remembers like singing for her mother's guests, right? So
Yeah.
like,
yeah, like the I mean, my dad tells me this story. Like, so my dad's family is Sicilian and they lived in like Brooklyn, right? And his mother, this is in the 40s, right? His mother and his grandmother were both seamstresses in a sweatshop, where other Sicilian immigrants worked. He was like 3, and they would take him, and he would stand on like the tables and like recite really long poems in Sicilian. Sorry, really cute.
like busking, or like for money,
This wasn't entertaining,
or like,
he was like a precocious little kid who could like remember all of these.
oh, so to entertain the ladies in the workshop.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's like he says, he's like, I don't know which my first language is, like Sicilian or English. Like he doesn't speak Sicilian now, right? Like it's forgotten. But yeah, he could do that when he was like 3. And I just think about like that is like with Adele, is like you have like a very precocious child who you like trot out. They're like 3, and for some reason they can recite this entire romantic like ballad that they can sing like really well. And it's like, of course you're gonna like bring them out to like entertain your guests.
Right? Who doesn't want to see that? I want to see that. Let Adele sing.
That's what TikTok is for, right? Like so that we can all enjoy like Adele, like singing like her little song that she has no concept what it means, right? Which is part of why it's like cute, right?
Yeah. And then like also like when it talks about, I mean, it doesn't specifically obviously discuss the first Mrs. Rochester as a child, but it discusses sort of her essential nature as one of like intemperance and whatever. And like, but then if you like look at little Jane, right? Like little Jane is defined by being too passionate and too intense and too weird and too creepy and freaking out adults who can't like handle her. But somehow that isn't ever like, that compassion is never extended to other children or other intense, difficult children that maybe like adults in their lives should like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't.
Yeah, it's like one of those things where, again, like I feel like they do it in the film version sometimes, where Jane makes a like defensive like Adele. But I don't know if that's I don't remember if that happens in like the book, because Jane is like really judgy in the same way that Lucy Snow is really judgy in like Villette. I don't know if people have read Villette.
I haven't read it, but I'm sure she is. I'm sure all of Charlotte Bronte's characters are like that. I read The Professor, which was also about a teacher being unbearably judgy of his pupils.
It's like so I don't know. It's like one of those really curious things where you're like, I just feel like this is I just read Mistress of Melon for my class like last month, and Martha has like the same trait of being like very judgmental about other people, like there's the 2 servant girls who are like very sexual, and she's like very judgy of them. But it's really interesting because that was written in like the early 60s, where it kind of almost implies that it's like she's envious of their ability to be flirtatious and like sexual, right? Like she wants to be able to do that, but she can't, and she doesn't feel like it's like an option for her. Which I don't think is like maybe like the case in like Jane Eyre, but it's like such an implication of the way that her voice is like written in Mistress of Melon, where you can see that she's like, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to flirt, like you guys freak me out, I don't like it. Like I wish I did, I don't even know. And like this really complicated set of like feelings and responses to like not wanting to be like that, but also not knowing how to be that, but also wanting to be like desirable, but knowing that you're not desirable, and sort of being like stuck in this weird contradictory set of like emotional responses. Like that was like the best part of like that book. I thought that it did that really well. If people are thinking about like the Gothic and like a version of Jane Eyre, because Mistress of Melon is definitely like a version of Jane Eyre.
Yeah, I never read that one because I started like plowing my way through Victoria Holt, and then I hit the one with the rape hero, and I was like,
When is
I never went
that?
back. So I don't remember the name of it, but I believe she's maybe like a portraitist. Is the one where she's a portraitist? But she like goes to his estate, and like his cousin is into her, and he hates his cousin for some reason, so he like abducts her and like rapes her like a bunch to punish his cousin, so his cousin can't marry her. And then she like goes off, and like it was kind of a secret baby thing. She goes off, she has his baby, he doesn't know that, and then they like meet again, like question mark, during the French Revolution. Does that make any sense? I don't know. But they meet again, and then
she wrote like 200 books.
he like
So I
saves the
haven't read
kid's
all.
life, and somehow now it's okay. And then it was like there was this whole bit about how she like when she thought he was just overcome by his attraction to her, that was better than when she realized it was like a revenge on his cousin, that was like worse. And I was just like, I just couldn't, like I was just like, I don't trust Victoria Holt anymore. It's over between us. It was good while it lasted. But I mean, I'm not saying anybody else shouldn't, but I just like that was
That's
my
a
experience
really,
as a high school student.
I mean, when you write like 200 books, like I guess that's what happens. Like you run out of plot and you're just like, we'll just see what happens. Like we're gonna just throw that, then we're just gonna throw this in, right? Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
we were just talking about the Black Moth and these old shades, and it's like, on the one hand, I'm like kind of like, why did it, like if it was like it's literally all the same characters, why did you have to give everyone new names? Like I don't understand why you weren't just like, well, and now it's Tracy Belmont's book, you know. But at the same time, and then it's like, on the one hand, I kind of appreciate she didn't, because like Tracy's behavior is so bad, and maybe I can imagine that like Justin's behavior was less bad. But then it's like, we know that he abducted someone and he's horrible, and I actually dislike him significantly more, like whereas I kind of love Tracy even though he's like a garbage human. Like I really genuinely hate Justin.
Is it because in the Black Moth, like is it the way that like his perspective is written in the Black Moth?
I think it's a combination of factors. I think we do get like some sort of sympathetic, like we see like his like you know, crappy childhood and his like abusive mother and whatever. But like I actually think it's more about like he's the villain first of all, so I don't have to root for anyone to get with him.
Right.
I think he's much younger. Like the part of what I really disliked about these old shades is that like the hero is so much older than the heroine, and like that the power dynamic is like so, the fact that like I'm supposed to like him now even though it's the same shitty guy I was supposed to dislike before, and nothing is different, and that he's like so much older, and like this poor kid is like, and then also like maybe I could have forgiven all that, but I could not get past him telling her that the reason that the whole big misunderstanding at the end is that he tells her that it's disgusting for people to bring their illegitimate children into society. Right. So she like runs away, and then he has to go and explain to her, not that he loves her, but that it's okay because she's legitimate. And I was just like, you know what? It's over between you and me, Justin. You and Hugh don't even seem that happy. You don't have what Tracy and Frank had, okay? Like what they had was real. Like I just like everything about it annoyed me. I feel like he was like shitty to his little brother. Like there was just nothing, like none of the sort of like the thing about Tracy. And again, I'm not justifying any of his behavior. He's obviously a nightmare human. The thing about Tracy is that he feels like a human, like obviously again in an unacceptable manner, but like he is a giant cry for help. Do you know what I mean? Like he is a man exactly who is like what you mean. Self-destructive. Like Justin feels more like just sort of smug and entitled, whereas like Tracy feels like horrifically self-destructive as well as destructive of others. Like his behavior is designed to like sabotage himself, right? Like there's all of this stuff where like
Yeah.
he's
Yeah,
betting money
totally...
he shouldn't have, and he's drinking too much, and like his friend, he's being like, okay, it seems like you're like really unhappy, and like maybe you should like look inward and try to like process things in a healthier way. And he's like, but what if we just like I got in like 8 duels and like drank 20 gallons of claret and like gambled away like $1 bajillion, and then like tricked this guy into like marrying my sister so I could live off his money. And like it's just like, and also only like he feels like so like I don't know, it like something about him feels a little more raw and genuine to me. And I'm probably just trying
Yeah,
to
that I
down
think that
whatever,
totally
but
makes sense to me. It's kind of like, if I don't know if you watch The Bachelor, but like they'll set up certain people as like the villain, or like as, but there'll always be like these moments where like the villainous person on this reality show, like their actual humanity cracks through. And oh God, okay, I shouldn't like revel in this, but like there is this one guy, I forget his name, he was like terrible, but he was like on JoJo's season, and he was like the big villain of that season. And but then you like fucking find out that his mother just died, and I was like, oh shit, dude, you should not be on this show right now. And it was like they were really close, and she just died, and you're like, I was like, oh buddy, I was like, you're still a terrible person. Like you're still an entitled dumb bro. But like like your real actual humanity has just cracked through. And now I can't just, and now I have
reality television has taught me like
sympathy for you.
I never fully like understood before reality television like how true it was that like arrogance and like insecurity are flip sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
That like if somebody is arrogant, it's because they are insecure. And again, it's not a justification for anybody's behavior, right? People are accountable for their actions. But
Right.
like it's like there's this villain on Storage Wars. I believe his name was Dave. I'm not sure, but he was like a nightmare person. He would like purposely like bid up things he didn't want to sabotage other people. Like he was mean. He really had it in for this like sweet young couple that were like just starting out, and he would always be like sabotaging them for no reason. And then there was like this thing where like well, whatever, we didn't see the whole plot with his brother. Like his brother showed up, and it was like they weren't speaking, and he like didn't want to talk about it. It was obviously like a sore spot, and it was like, oh, even though it was probably, I mean, maybe it was his fault, maybe it wasn't his fault, I don't know. Like whatever it was seemed sad. But then there was the thing that I will always remember is there was like he was so mean to everyone and so smug, and he had this very like zero sum game thing, right? It was always like if somebody else wins, even if it's not in any way damaging, if somebody else wins, that's him losing. If somebody else gets like a good locker,
Yeah.
that's like a loss for him because he could have got that locker even though he wasn't bidding on that locker, right? Like he had very much, and like he like had found this like nice music box that he thought was valuable in a locker, and he was like carrying it to his car, and he dropped it and it broke, and he was like, it was awful, like he was like stupid and just like beating himself up, and it was like, oh
Yeah. Oh
oh
no.
no, like
Oh no. Yeah.
yeah. And I feel like I've seen that like so many times like on reality TV where it's like this person seems like all they are through and through is just like looking down on others, and it's like, no, this person is miserable and hates themselves. Again, not an excuse for behavior, but like
Right. But like in terms of like characters and like stories, right? It's like maybe like the thing is that like with the hero like Justin, right? Is like part of the I think that you're either like the appeal is either in that he seems like impregnable, right? As like a character, right? That he's not vulnerable, that he's somehow invulnerable, except to like this one person, right? Which is like a fantasy that many people
I'm
have.
not gonna say I never love that fantasy. I just like it doesn't work for me with Justin, obviously.
Right. But I think that like even for that fantasy to work, there has to be more cracks in like the armor. And I mean, I haven't read These Old Shades in like a really long time, so I don't really remember. but it just sounds like, how many cracks are there in like this armor that like we're able to see, so that we too can like feel like the humanity like creeping through, because that's really the thing that is alluring, right? Like that's the thing that you want to see, is like the little cracks in the armor, because otherwise it's
And
just
then he's such a jerk in Devil's Cup too. It's like, oh, and he's a terrible father. Like, what about him am I supposed to like? I don't get it. I'm sorry. I don't get
yeah, it is, and it's just like, and it is, I think that it's like he just seems like, I don't know.
I
Yeah,
also feel like
that,
there is an androgyny to Tracy that appeals to me, like I connect you to, whereas like it feels like when she wrote Justin, she really wanted him to be Butcher.
yeah,
And to have then there's another villain who, like, despite the fact that Justin is literally just Tracy, somehow this villain is like more like, is like, becomes the one who is now like sort of not manly in some way.
yeah.
And like
It,
that also like there's something about the masculinity in it that really like,
it's really interesting, because I think that like she's so much bringing like a late 19th century conception of like masculinity to characters who exist in a time where like masculinity is more about class position than it is about particular characteristics.
and she's so much, it's really interesting because clearly part of what is drawing her about that time period is that masculinity is performed differently, right? Like she's clearly really into the fact that they wear makeup and wigs and they're allowed to like think about their clothes and whatever. Like she loves
Right.
that and like wear
I
bright,
mean, is
like
there
wear fancy
any,
clothes. She's super into it, but it makes her uncomfortable, like very clearly, and she doesn't know how to like,
she
yeah.
doesn't know how to like deal with it. Yeah, I think that that's very true. um yeah, anyway, like we are reading Devil's Cub like this month as about rakes, so I need to reread it this week. I mean, I read it a lot. I taught it to my students once when I had like no oversight as a graduate student in the classes that I taught, so I just taught anything I wanted. It was great. um
My uncle read that. I must have recommended it to him, Devil's Cub. And then, like, I guess it was a long time ago. I don't even remember. Like, but clearly he read it. And then he, like, got confused and he thought I had read it. I mean, obviously at the time, right, he didn't think I'd read it. But, like, years later, it was, like, sort of still in his brain.
right.
And he was like, and I was complaining, I think, about, like, I don't know, like, I was talking to him about some kind of discussion about consent and romance, whatever.
Right.
And he was like, you wrote a story where the guy like tried to rape the girl. And I was like, I definitely didn't, but like, tell me more. And he was like, described to me. I was like, that is Devil's Cub.
Like, I didn't read that, but thanks, I guess.
I mean,
like,
look, I love it. What can I say? The part where she cries, so good. But,
yeah. Oh man, yeah. That's so funny. Oh my gosh, should we
we should wrap up. Obviously we could probably just talk forever, but we don't need to.
We don't need to do it on recorded.
Yeah, exactly.
Zoom. Yeah, so
but you should totally follow Angela on Patreon. I haven't looked at this, but the first newsletter was like so good, and I've actually borrowed insights from it for interviews. I mean, with credit, but like the thing about Gothics and denouements was anyway. But
yeah, my
like
second,
very
February newsletter is early access to my patrons. So it's going to get released to like the general public like today. So if you're like interested in that, you can sign up for my newsletter on my website too. So that one's about rakes. So the history of rakes, and at some point I'm going to talk about fake rakes, and like I'll put that up on a
fake rake.
video.
Can we get like a little teaser of what a fake?
Yeah, I'm just gonna be like, it's gonna be a lot of me saying like people who are called rakes but who aren't rakes, and then I'm gonna explain why. For example, Wickham is not a rake.
Wickham.
Yeah,
no, Wickham's not a rake.
He's not a rake. Willoughby is not a rake. Like a lot of the Jane Austen heroes who get called rakes are not rakes. They're cads, which is a different category of duplicitous.
Is the distinction like a power distinction or like a class distinction of some kind?
It's both a power and a class distinction, and it's also about the way that they operate. Like rakes, especially in the 18th and 17th century, were like publicly rakes.
Oh yeah,
Right.
right.
Yeah,
like
they
Willoughby and
were
Wickham are trying to pass as gentlemen,
respectable gentlemen.
Yeah.
And like that is why they're not rakes, right? Because they care about respectability, which
that makes sense.
You're not a rake if you care about whether or not people respect you. That's just the like yeah. So that's my little...
and you have to, I mean, that which does type, all right, it's like they're not independent, right? They're relying on
wealthy,
other people to fund them, and so they need people to trust them in some way, whereas like if you don't need anybody, I mean, it's like the whole, like that is such a theme. I mean, it makes sense, right? But like in Jane Austen of like who is independent, right? Like even in like Emma, where it's like what Knightley is like, look, if Miss Bates was rich and you were rude to her, I would kind of be like, well, that was rude, but whatever. But like she is dependent on you, and so that's not appropriate. Or like the way that Elizabeth talks to Lady Catherine, you know, it's like all about like who can afford to be rude to who, and who is it acceptable, you know, like who, like
right, where's the power relationship here, right? Because it's also the idea of like punching up or down, you know, like Emma punched down. She punched down, and she should be ashamed.
She is, but yeah, she should be.
You're like, I'm still...
anyway, we're gonna wrap it up because otherwise, like we can
we'll stop.
Not wrap it up if we don't wrap it up. So, but this has been delightful. I hope you all enjoyed it, even a small fraction as much as we did. So, see you around, and I'll links to most of what we talked about will be in the notes below.
Sweet. Bye.